Municipal Mobilization: Applying Leadership Strategies to Engaging Voters by Courtney Grayhawk. Hello, I am Courtney Grayhawk. Over the past 2 years, I have been studying for a master's in organizational leadership through St. Mary's University of Minnesota. This presentation is the final portion of the capstone symposium for that program. This presentation focuses on what I have learned in the program, utilizing my personal leadership style and skills to address a community need that I'm passionate about. Over the past several months, I've been involved with the community outreach and engagement efforts of Muncie Resists. They are a progressive activist organization based in Muncie, but working to support Delaware County and the surrounding areas. They focus on reaching out to elected officials and raising awareness of local issues. Muncie Resists wants to engage voters for the 2019 local elections. I will review literature to explain the value of voting in municipal elections and what approaches to mobilization have been proven effective. Then I'll outline the specific circumstances in Muncie and for Muncie Resists. I will use a Lewin force field analysis to illustrate the desired change and then move to an action plan to help Muncie Resists mobilize voters before explaining how this has affected me as a leader. I am personally passionate about voting. The day after the 2010 election, I sat in my first undergraduate leadership class, and the professor asked about our voting experience the day before. But only 2 people had made the effort to vote. The professor was aghast and wrote this quote on the board: "Decisions are made by those who show up." He said if you have any intention of leading, you have to show up. It is the very least you can do and still call yourself a leader. You need to be engaged as a citizen, not just politically, but in your communities. It is your job to inspire and lead others to be engaged. You can't do that if you don't show up and set an example. This experience is part of what inspired me to devote my capstone project to helping Muncie Resist engage the community and mobilize voters for the important municipal election coming up in 2019. The goal of the literature review was to determine what outreach strategies are effective at increasing voter turnout in off-year municipal elections. Nearly half of voting-age citizens failed to vote in presidential elections. This disengagement has been cited as evidence of the ongoing crisis in American democracy. Hijnal and Lewis, 2003. Turnout is much lower for smaller elections, and many cities report that on average less than 1/4 of eligible voters participate in mayoral and city elections. Hijnal and Lewis, 2003. This lack of participation can have major effects on a community. One way low participation affects a community is by skewing representation. High-propensity voters are disproportionately privileged in terms of race, socioeconomic status, education, marital status, and long-term residence. Burden et al., 2014. Skewed representation frequently results in uneven allocations of resources and in perpetuating disadvantage due to a lack of representation. Holbrook and Weinschenk, 2014. There are a number of ways that the structure of a local government and the setup of the election affect turnout. When local governance has a more political structure handled by elected officials rather than an administrative structure, appointed officials like city managers, the community is more actively engaged in voting. Wood, 2002. The extra information provided on partisan ballots, as well as other aspects that contribute to the competitiveness of an election, increase turnout. Holbrook and Weinschenk, 2014. Burden et al., 2014, explains that the more time voters have to register, the higher turnout will be, particularly with election day and same-day voter registration, significantly increasing voter turnout. Early voting has a contingent effect on turnout. It only increases turnout when coupled with same-day voter registration. due to an indirect negative effect on mobilization efforts. The negative effect can be easily combated with increased mobilization. Stein and Vonaham, 2008, explain that moving away from precinct polling locations to more centrally located voting centers where voters can go to any center increases the convenience of voting and thus the turnout. Mobilization is taking individuals who are uncertain about voting and getting them to the polls. There are two major theories or approaches to mobilization. The first is social occasion theory. This is the idea that social pressure, particularly positive social pressure and public consciousness, increase voter turnout. Panagopoulos, Lindley, and Hamill, 2017, confirm that knowing and associating with people who vote increases the likelihood that individuals and communities will vote. The more voting is socially valued, the greater voter engagement. This is readily apparent in other countries. Malhotra et al. Explains that the second approach to mobilization is about noticeable reminders. The premise is that not voting is less an issue of apathy and disengagement than it is about scheduling and information. Being reminded when and where to vote increases turnout for individuals who have a history of voting in larger elections. The less engaged an individual is, the more social or direct contact is needed to help them mobilize and vote. Muncie is a medium-sized city largely known for Ball State University, where I completed my undergraduate degree. The city is facing the potential for major changes in the 2019 election. The mayor and many city council members are not seeking re-election, leaving many races without an incumbent. The city government has a political structure with power largely resting with the elected officials. Early voting is available, but registration ends the day before early voting starts. The city has been looking into moving from precinct polling to voting centers, but it's unclear whether or not this reform will be available in time for the 2019 election. Muncie Resists formed following the 2016 elections. It organizes and supports a wide variety of events. It has done teach-ins, protests, vigils, candidate meet and greets, and organized rides to the polls for previous elections. Often they work with other local organizations to boost their impact. Most recently, Muncie Resists was part of a large local coalition in opposition of the ecological impact of a proposed heavy metal recycling facility just outside of town. The rapid mobilization effort helped to raise enough public outcry to stop the development of the facility entirely. To create an action plan to help them achieve this goal, I turned to Lewin's force field analysis, which is well suited to illustrate the forces impacting local voter mobilization. The trans-theoretical change model was also considered for understanding the changes needed in terms of cost and individual perception to achieve mobilization. However, this focus is less applicable to creating an actionable mobilization plan for Muncie Resists.
When we have a tough decision to make, many of us write a list of the pros and cons. Then if we have more pluses than minuses, we should surely just go ahead with it. Well, not necessarily. If you've ever made one of these lists, you already know the problem. Most of the time, the pros and cons aren't equally important. For instance, you might just have 3 cons on your list, but one of them might be particularly significant. More so even than all the pros you've listed. So it's hard to make a balanced decision with a simple list. One way around this is to use force field analysis. This technique helps you weigh up the forces for and against change and represents them in a visually clear way. Once you've done this, you'll have a more accurate assessment of your decision. Conducting a force field analysis is easy. Take a piece of paper and think about the decision you're making. On the left-hand side, list forces for change, that is the pros of the decision. On the right-hand side, list the forces against change, or the cons of the decision. Next, go through and assign a score of between 1 and 5 for each of the pros and cons. A score of 1 means that this element isn't that important. A 5 means it's very important. When you score the pros and cons on the diagram, you can represent the importance of each force by drawing arrows around them. Use bigger arrows for the forces that have a greater influence on the change, and smaller ones for those that have less. Once you've done this, add up each column. You now know whether it's worth going ahead with the decision.
The force field analysis can be used to understand where you are starting from, including the forces that are holding the status quo in equilibrium. It can also be used to diagram the end goal and propose what forces could look like at the new desired equilibrium. With a beginning and an endpoint clearly outlined, you can work on creating an action plan to change each force shifting to a new status quo. It is worth noting that these diagrams are snapshots of dynamic systems, and therefore there may be unforeseen forces at play. Cronshaw and McCulloch 2008 explain that forces are not always a simple direct opposition. Constraining forces are not blocking or facilitating a desired change, but going in another direction. For mobilization, this could be students preferring to be registered and voting in their hometowns, which does mobilize the voter but doesn't increase local turnout for Muncie. According to Brookshire 2016, effort required to register, lack of information about candidates and issues, apathy, burnout, and the limitations of a two-party system are the leading reported causes that people do not vote. On the flip side, education, opportunity for change, community demand for change, and community outreach all drive engagement and voter mobilization. In a 2018 NPR broadcast, Athil Khalid explained that not believing your voice or your vote matters and not having adequate information causes voters to disengage. Looking at Muncie specifically, the primary forces opposing mobilization are 1, a lack of easily accessible information on candidates and local issues, and 2, low voter registration. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Indiana is consistently below national registration rates. Burnout and apathy are also factors in blocking mobilization. Recent success with public outcry causing changes makes this a less significant opposition. Finally, the two-party system is often cited as discouraging voters looking for more options. Fortunately, in Muncie, there are active third parties, including a number of Green Party candidates on November's ballot. Supporting mobilization is the high level of education in the area. During the school year, nearly a third of the population are students, and the education levels increase the likelihood of voting. There are a number of opportunities for change, which drives engagement. Community outreach also drives engagement, but it is not highly prevalent, making it an area that could be increased to push mobilization. The final factor for mobilization and engagement in Muncie is a strong demand for change. The city is in the midst of a multi-year federal investigation, and the community is demanding changes in the transparency and function of the city government.
Developing tonight, the FBI has conducted several raids in Muncie there in Delaware County. Call 6 Investigates has been told that the raids are tied to 2 unrelated cases. One search happened at a business near Willard and Hackley Streets. The Muncie Star-Press reporting that the raid is connected to a long-running investigation of Muncie Mayor Dennis Tyler and the city's sanitary district.
With all of this information and input from members and leaders of Muncie Resists, I have developed a proposed action plan. The action plan for Muncie Resists focuses on reducing the cost of voting while engaging the community directly. The slogan is, "This is your city, vote." Change actions will include voter registration drives focused on low-income neighborhoods, apartment complexes, and the city's large student population. These events will be a combination of standalone events and participation in citywide community events. These drives will serve multiple purposes. First, of course, for registering and updating registration for voters. And second, in collecting information to send reminder texts as advocated by Panagopoulos in 2017. The contact point of these registration drives is also an excellent opportunity to provide voters with much needed information. Coordinating with other outreach efforts by organizations such as the League of Women Voters, the Progressive Student Union, the Democratic Socialist Alliance, and other organizations will help Muncie Resists to reach the communities that need to be registered, and it will increase the social and warm contact potential of the outreach. The information that needs to be prepared prior to the voter registration drives is twofold. The easy part is general election information regarding voting, including registration, ID requirements, and maps of polling locations, all of which is available online and just needs to be compiled. The more challenging information to collect will be relevant and concise information about local issues and candidates. This information, in many cases, doesn't exist or will take a lot of research to find, and we'll probably need to interview candidates directly. Once this information has been collected, paper copies should be available at registration drives, along with a new section on the organization's website, and this will do a lot to reduce the information cost for voters. Registering voters, sharing information, increasing election salience and awareness should all reduce barriers to mobilization. These outreach events and actions, along with being able to remind voters, will facilitate mobilization. This action plan draws from as many recommendations from literature as it seemed feasible for Muncie Resists to implement. The components of the action plan have been carefully planned out. However, there are still some obstacles and potential issues. One important aspect to consider is the role of bias. Muncie Resists has an uncompromisingly progressive agenda. The organization will focus on providing information only for progressive candidates. To reduce overall bias without working against Muncie Resists' progressive goals, the registration drives can provide information about where voters may be able to find additional information for conservative candidates, rather than Muncie Resist directly compiling it. Additionally, while social media has already been widely used in voter mobilization strategies and in marketing, there isn't data to support this practice. But due to its low fiscal and time costs, Muncie Resists is planning to employ the strategy anyway. Muncie Resists is a grassroots organization. This means they use a bottom-up decision-making process, and this can make quick decisions challenging, and the leadership can also be somewhat diffuse. This feeds into the challenge of timing. There's a scant 6 weeks to plan, coordinate, and put on registration events before registration ends and early voting begins. Coupled with finite resources, enacting all of the proposed action plans may not be feasible for this election. However, this will certainly prepare the organization to use more advanced mobilization tactics for the 2020 primaries and presidential elections. A humorous reminder about the importance of voting is found in a tweet from 2017. The mayor of Jaws is still mayor in Jaws 2. It is so important to vote in your local elections. Our decisions to vote at the local level have a huge impact on how our communities operate. So be engaged and vote in your own local elections. It can be hard to believe that one vote matters, or even that the small act of voting can make a difference. As more people are motivated to participate, the potential for change grows. Organizing and inspiring people into collective action is the essence of leadership. Collective action can change the world, but it starts from changes in cities and states, from changes in neighborhoods and homes, all starting with changes within each of us. Brené Brown is a researcher and author. In her book, Dare to Lead, she explains that who we are is how we lead. Empowering others requires being empowered yourself. The Organizational Leadership Master's Program has been a stepping stone for me to become an empowered leader. It has given me a multitude of tools to address individual and organizational conflict, tools to manage and even effectively plan change, and techniques to effectively communicate across barriers such as culture and generational differences. On a more personal level, this master's program has been a catalyst for a journey of self-reflection and growth. It's helped me to acquire more confidence in the skills that I had as well as those I was developing. After 2 years of study and effort, I find myself empowered not to just show up myself, but to take what I know and use it to empower my community. I will continue to show up and remember that I'm a citizen of the world, and the very least that I can do is work to build it up.